Hello ladies and gentlemen, Will here. RuneScape has been a game that I've played for, well, a few years longer than I care to admit. There's something about the simplicity of it all that's just aged very well. It encapsulates the curious charm of the go cut one type of tree for 20 hours until you can cut another type of tree for another 20 hours. 20 hours, of course, being a massive exaggeration. It takes far longer than that to level up woodcutting or thieving or mining. That's before we even get to rune crafting. Or at least that used to be the case. During 2012 and releasing in 2013, Jagex would take RuneScape from the simple point-and-click combat style which had worked so well for the game for over a decade and bring it up to date, promising an enormous overhaul which would revolutionize the game, add far more depth to the combat and make it a much more engaging experience. This was of course the evolution of combat. If you ever wanted a prime example of how incredibly important combat is in the MMORPG space, look no further than this. EOC was to add abilities to RuneScape, similar to many other powerhouse MMOs at the time, like WoW of course. They would revamp the appearance of armor sets and bring out a brand spanking new HTML client to run it all on, which never made it out of beta by the way. However, during the beta for this huge update, a few things became clear. 1. It was not ready for launch. Combat felt incredibly unresponsive and clunky. 2. There was a very mixed response on the update, with players being all over the place in terms of preference from the original. And 3. This would permanently change RuneScape forever, and this realization really began to sink in the closer things got to the launch time for RuneScape 3. In fact, players took to the streets in Falador as is customary to riot and shout their displeasure, and wish one final goodbye to the RuneScape that they had known for many years. I was among them. Of course, in time, old school RuneScape would be polled and launched and has since become incredibly successful in its own right, enjoying many new updates and fresh content to keep the game alive. And well, though RuneScape 3 got off to a very poor start, some players stuck with it, as did Jagex. Now, it often takes quite a bit longer in the oven for an MMO to really be cooked to perfection, and RuneScape 3 has been in there for quite a while now. Whilst not without its own issues, it has covered a truly huge amount of distance and grown into its own separate game from what made it successful years ago. And yet there are still some things which just consistently end up frustrating me about it. So in this video I hope to explore the goods and the bads and see whether RuneScape would be worth a go in 2022. If you like the content, do consider dropping a like on the channel and a sub. But let's start out with the basics, as at its core this is still a RuneScape experience. Your quests are not kill and collect. We have a skill for that, it's called Slayer. Instead, the quests are stories. Some are as simple as baking a cake, others will be a multi-part experience, taking you across the entire world of Gillinor, solving puzzles, defeating bosses, training skills, and even taking out gods. In RuneScape 3, there are many quests that not only have cutscenes, but are also voice acted and have specific orchestral music alongside, an extra touch that has not made its way to old school RuneScape yet. Quests in RuneScape 3 have scanned such a great period of time and ages, as they call them in the game world, that they even recommend to have completed other ones before handing in to be able to fully appreciate the story that will unfold. This is a wonderful little touch and can help you plan ahead for your adventures in a way that makes the most sense for you. The actual stories and lore in RuneScape 3 have been given a much greater space, and they continue to grow year upon year. Though getting off to a rough start with poor performance, RuneScape 3 has again come a long way since then and has had many graphically impressive zones. I know many people say graphics don't matter at all for a game, but they can certainly help attract people in and create more interesting, engaging worlds. You can even change the skybox in the game as well as the filter, ranging from dusk to dawn to Bloodborne to on LSD. There's something for everybody. The UI is also very customizable, albeit kind of clunky and not exactly the most intuitive at first, because there is an absolutely massive amount of different things going on at the same time. And if you do want to get to grips with the combat in RuneScape 3, you're going to be spending some time messing about with it until you're happy. Also in the top left corner of the UI, you will see a little box with a key next to it. This is a bad button. You do not press this box. Well, if you want an Iron Man anyway, but more on that later. Another thing in common with your RuneScape experience is skilling. It's not gone anywhere in RuneScape 3. In fact, there are skills that you will likely not recognize, as well as entire reworks to certain skills as well. Mining is no longer just go up to a rock, click it, and wait for ore to appear in your bag and repeat for many hours until 99. There are bonuses for mining at the correct time, managing a stamina bar, and so on. RuneScape 3 offers more intensive methods for better experience, or if you're just relaxing, you can just click rocks and watch something on monitor number 2. Similarly, smithing has been entirely reworked, because let's be honest, 99 smithing for a rune 2-hander or a rune plate body is just so vastly outdated as a concept. I'm surprised it's even still a thing in old school RuneScape at this point. It's not exactly the most complicated still, but you've got a UI overhaul, and then heating your materials and working them at the anvil are a core part of the rework. This means more time actually doing smithing and less time running between your bank and the anvil with an inventory full of bars. There are new skills, of course, invention to add perks to your armor and weapons. This also dually serves as an item sink, because items must be disassembled for components which are added to gizmos, which then equal perks. This keeps items leaving the game and gives even old, seemingly irrelevant gear a monetary value for what it could disassemble into. For example, almost every single reward unique to clue scrolls is worth over 1 million in RuneScape 3, as they disassemble into fortunate components which are used in some high-end perks. Yes, even comp bows. Divination is another new gathering skill, which is a bit more of a support for other skills and has a large part in many quests as you're exploring memories of the past. Along a similar vein, we also have archaeology, which was brought out in 2021 and was received exceptionally well. This skill predictably has you digging up the past, unlocking new areas, bonuses, lore. There is an absolute enormous amount going on with this skill. It could be its entire own topic. Suffice to say though, it is pretty good. Also in RuneScape 3 now, many skills don't stop at level 99 anymore. There's content up to level 120 for Slayer, Herbalore, farming, dungeoneering, archaeology, and invention, with more skills expected to join these in the future. Of course, the leveling skills on RuneScape 3 is faster overall, with so many new methods to make gold and train your skills over what old school RuneScape has. If you put it like this, seeing level 99 as the cap in RuneScape, which is about 30 million XP, a level 120 is 104 million XP, so it's not exactly fast to get all the same. And beyond skilling, of course, we have the combat. Oh boy. The combat in RuneScape 3. Now, many years ago when RuneScape was made, it was built on a grid-based system where each place you can click is a square. These are visible in old school RuneScape. You can even mark them on your client. They are not in RuneScape 3. This means although the game is much nicer to look at, there are plenty of times where you will do something and your character will do one of the following. A, nothing. B, wrong direction. C, basically anything other than the thing that you were trying to do, and it is so frustrating. It being point and click, even on servers where I am around 20 to 25 ping, apparently, there is a very noticeable delay between action and movement. Furthermore, many abilities are locked into animations, and all this leads to is a big old pile of clunk, and clunk is bad. Imagine you ordered World of Warcraft from Wish. RuneScape 3 combat is what you would get. Say what you want about Classic or WoW in general, but the combat is just so smooth and responsive, and if you try another game, you will realize that you have been spoiled. And to get to grips with it, you have to struggle through the clunk for many hours to understand how abilities interact with each other, when to animation cancel, optimizing movement, equipment swapping, prayer swapping. The actual skill cap of RuneScape 3 PVM is extremely high. It's APM heavy and it's timing and muscle memory intensive. It is way more complicated than World of Warcraft on both classic and retail, and coming back to it and trying to PVM in RuneScape can feel very overwhelming with the amount of information, new items, quests, abilities, and so on, which are absolutely bombarded at you. But once you start to get a hold of how things work, the combat can feel satisfying to pull off correctly in a meaningful way. It's just a question of whether you can get to that stage and really want to push and invest your time into it. At times I hate the combat, at times I love it, but if I can say one thing about the PVM in RuneScape, there are few offerings on the MMO market for a more diverse solo player experience. There are some group bosses, but the majority are designed or can be soloed with the necessary experience and gear. There are bosses ranging from the low to medium levels all the way to the extremely difficult scaling challenges at endgame, where you can streak your kills in order to improve your reward, and if you die, you lose it. There are currently 2 bosses in RuneScape 3, where the hardest version is 4,000% more difficult than the baseline encounter. Yes, 4,000%. It's hard, like really, really hard, even with best gear possible. There are also different levels to the combat as to how you set your character up. There is something called Legacy Mode, which is just like old school RuneScape, which is based off auto attacks and special attacks. There is then Revolution, where the game will automatically activate certain abilities of your choosing, which should eventually help you transition into full manual, which, as it suggests, you have control over every single ability that's going out. And how well you're able to perform in PvM encounters will depend to a degree which one of these you are currently using. And it's also worth a mention along the vein of combat and gearing that, similar to old school RuneScape, RuneScape 3 doesn't do expansions. It keeps adding content horizontally, which is a big benefit for me, as whenever you do come back to the game, your gear remains just as relevant as when you left for the content that you are currently engaging with. There may have been more added at endgame or early game, but the gear you have in that moment will be exactly at the same power level as when you left it. Very few MMOs do this. The majority of them do massive updates and reset your entire gear and progress every few years. This doesn't happen in RuneScape. You don't really get behind of others. You're just at the point in the game where you are, if that makes sense. And then we kind of had to get to it eventually, didn't we? The in-game shop. As far as microtransactions goes, RuneScape 3 is a poster child of how bad it can get. I've no doubt the worst out there exists because mobile games exist, but microtransactions in RuneScape have gone way off the deep end over the years. You can level a character entirely to endgame stats and millions of gold, acquire gear and various perks just through spending money and not playing the game whatsoever. Each day there will be numerous things on offer, creating an atmosphere of fear of missing out, and over the years there's been more events and more overpowered offers pushed to the shop to try and entice you to get your wallet out. And it's not just the experience or gold boosts either. There are numerous cosmetics which allow you to have pets which take up half your screen, glowing armor sets, floating, hopping about non-stop, and one of my personal biggest dislikes that MMOs seem to keep doing, wings and glasses. Look, my eyesight's already bad in real life, but what if I could also make my fantasy character visually impaired? What next? Are we all going to be playing humans in fantasy games as well? World of Warcraft added glasses and wings, and Shadowlands as well. That's a minus for it. Anyways, Iron Man characters though who cannot trade or use the Grand Exchange do not get the constant NTX spam, as it would go against the idea behind the game mode. So that is an option to consider if you aren't the best with your wallet or just don't want a hassle from it. It would of course however mean starting entirely again from square one, but perhaps that would better suit learning all of the updates that have taken place over the years. I've actually been considering making a RuneScape 3 Iron Man myself. PvP wise, if you're into that, I suppose I should touch on it. Yeah, there's other games out there. Jagex barely update it. Majority of players don't bother with it. It's been left alone like an obsolete minigame. It still exists. The Wilderness still exists, don't get me wrong, but it's a niche, full loot PvP system with an extremely high learning curve that requires massive practice in order to not get completely farmed by the very small player base that engages with it, though honestly couldn't recommend the game for this whatsoever. Overall, beneath the surface, there is a solid game in RuneScape 3. I feel as though the initially poorly received release has held it back for much longer than it should have. There's also this rather noisy, inevitable crowd that plays old school RuneScape who doesn't really understand anything about RuneScape 3 other than they didn't like it a decade ago so they don't like it now. You get these people when games have different versions. They exist with WoW too. Classic good, retail bad. You know the type. The game has issues. The learning curve, clunky combat to learn, and a frankly egregious cash shop. But there is something here which is worth a go with. Unique questing and a story system, and the game looking good to amazing in parts, on top of solid customization. RuneScape 3 can offer a range from a second monitor game where you're just not paying too much attention whilst grinding out some skills, all the way to a 200 APM boss encounter that can last 20 to 30 minutes long, offering some of the best rewards the game has. I'd say heading into 2022, if you're looking to try something different, perhaps as an old school RuneScape player or not, RuneScape 3 is looking in a fairly good state. And whilst I cannot recommend it as enthusiastically as I will be able to do with old school RuneScape due to the issues it carries, it can very much still be an engaging and fun MMORPG to get into in its own right. So there we have it, RuneScape 3. I've been enjoying it a fair amount recently. I tend to play it on and off now and again, and I think it is worth a go. If you've given it a go recently or have been thinking about it, let me know how it's been, or after you've given it a go, what you think. That's about all though. As always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in. If you like the content, drop a like and subscribe, that would help me out greatly, and I shall see you all in the next one very soon.